I'm a guy that's 24. Each day I build some more. I like the sequels. I'm Rich Boy J. Hello boyos, Rich Boy J here back with another video, and this is going to be episode 20 of the Starkiller base mock build series. I am super sorry for the fact that this is coming out much later than I intended it to. I actually had announced that last week I wasn't going to be able to do an update because of a trip I was taking out of the state, and this past weekend I just didn't find the time to actually build what I wanted to get built, but over these past few days I've been pretty frantically building, trying to make sure that I'd have it as, I guess, finished as possible to show you guys, and that is of course the turret. The turret is what we're going to be focusing on this week, but before we get into that, I do want to give a very special thanks to those of you who donated this week on the live stream. Like I always say, if you guys are not tuning into the live stream, I certainly urge you to do so. It is a great way to not only see the mock early, but to also just hang around with some boyos, talk Star Wars. What more could you want? But I do want to give a thanks to Cosmic Brick 44, the Angel of Herb, YT JLF Gaming, SW Bricks 75, Warhead 777-100, Dandan6151, perfectly legitimate name, Ryan Mettler, and of course Mal. Thank you guys so much. It means a lot to me that you are willing to contribute. It really does mean the world to me. So that being said, like I mentioned earlier, the turret is what we focused on. It is mostly done. There are a few colors I need to switch out. There are also a few, like, I guess the cannons that actually sit on the turret I wasn't able to do. I could have done them in other colors. It wouldn't have worked because I basically needed to buy like the parts to complete the entire cannon for it. But shout out to my collection. I was able to build most of the turret with the parts I had. But that's enough talking. You guys have seen enough talking. Let's show you the time lapse and then we'll get into the actual build. Alright guys, it's turret time. So we finally have most of the turret built. I'm going to state the obvious first. There are these big black sticks on this thing. Those are basically the innards of the cannons that are going to be protruding from there. I just didn't have the parts for it, so I couldn't build it. Could have built it in other colors. It just would not have looked correct at all, considering most of it is dark gray. So I just figured I'll go ahead and place the orders for those, and hopefully, if not the next update, the one after that, you guys will see the cannons actually fixed on the turret. But there is certainly plenty to talk about on this build. So I designed this in LDD completely before this. I mean, as anyone who's followed the series has known, I've been working on this in LDD. I think when I finished it, it ended up having around like 3,500 pieces, which is ridiculous. Like, that's a lot. But it turned out, I think, to look pretty incredible. One thing that was super important was to capture a lot of the details around the sides of this thing. I talked about pretty extensively how just troubling it was for me to find good reference material. Shout out to everyone who helped with that, even the people who were willing to literally wait around in lobbies and try to get into the Starkiller base, I guess, level for Galactic Assault. I certainly appreciate that. But where do I even begin talking about this thing? So I guess we can talk about the base first. I like the way that this thing is shaped. It's not as simple, I guess, as the Death Star Turbolaser, where it's, you know, the top is very similar, but it just kind of goes down with like the pyramid shape. This one, you can see the back is far more elongated, and we have tons of details just along the side, lots of various shapes and just like greebling pieces this might be the most extensive like greebling job I've ever had to do on one thing. Like the only thing I can think of that would come close to this is maybe the Corvus that I built, but the greebling on that was really just kind of secluded to the small strips along the side of the ship, whereas this one just kind of had greebling all throughout it. So it was a fun process, you know, looking at some various pieces and figuring out what would work best for it. And I really actually do like the way this came out. One of the other nice things I think I mentioned is that, at least for the bottom base, it was that the designs on it are symmetrical, which meant I only had to design it once. I could not say the same thing for the top, but you know, that at least made it a little bit easier for me. And then we have some details at the front. One of the, I guess, kind of things I had to figure out was how to get the front section to line up with the back section, which is to say that if you look at it, like if you come from the bottom, like the base is lined up on a stud. I actually need to push that down. Well, I can figure that out later. But as you look at this top section, it's not aligned on a stud. It's actually kind of offset by a half stud. And the tiles on the side make it look, I guess, kind of like it's lined up with the rest of the build. So I'm just trying to make sure all that stuff worked together. Was a bit of a task, but I'm actually quite happy with the way it came out. I also really like these tiles that kind of stick out underneath that like top section of it. I love the way that looks. That was one of the more fun things to incorporate in this build, and I think it actually turned out pretty good. We move our way up to the top of the TURBOLASER. You can see there's a lot going on, and that's honestly an understatement. All four sides are fully detailed. So there's the back, and then here's a look at the other side. And all four sides have different details, so it was quite a chore trying to find reference material for all four sides of this thing that all looked good. After many hours of looking at videos on YouTube, I was able to find some decent reference material. And one of the biggest challenges with just designing this thing is the fact that if you look at the edges, you can see that there is a slight kind of sloping to it in the corners, because it is, in essence, kind of like a square pyramid with like the top chopped off. So there's a bit of sloping, maybe more of like a trapezoidal prism. That's probably a more accurate term for it. But I say that to mention that the way I guess I kind of approached getting that gradual sloping, because there's really no wedge plate that would give you that gradual of a slope. So I just decided to basically have it be layered, kind of like a cake. So you imagine this layer at the very bottom, and then there's a layer on top of it that's basically half a stud in going all the way around. And then the very top layer is also half a stud in. That honestly wasn't a super difficult thing to figure out. However, what was difficult to figure out is how to maintain details across the layers. Because if you think about it, because the middle layer is basically half stud off from the top and the bottom layer, every detail you put, like for example, this ladder that kind of had to line up from the top to the bottom, you had to offset all those details by half a stud to make them line up with the outer layers. So you can see for the top and the bottom layer, it was as simple as just kind of putting those bricks in there and making them line up, right? But for the middle, I had to basically like put a jumper in the middle here to get it to line up. Otherwise, it would be like half a stud off. And then put like tiles around the sides to make sure there weren't big gaps left with the rest of it. Because, you couldn't just offset everything, because if you offset everything, then the edges wouldn't be offset by half a stud. I know that's kind of a hard thing to conceptualize. Hopefully you guys can at least somewhat understand what I'm trying to convey here. But that was a difficult thing to kind of take into consideration going all the way across the build. So you can see like the same thing applies to these details here, because they go from this layer to that layer. For the most part, I tried my best to not have details cross through layers, but trying to adhere to reference material, of course, was going to ultimately determine how that was going to work out. So if we come to this side has some pretty intricate details. I'm actually need to find another one of those dark gray car hoods to put there. So that's what's missing there. But I actually quite like this side a lot. There's some good details, I feel. And like also another thing to mention, getting things to line up. This one had to line up as well. So I basically went from using like a 1x1 with a stud on the side for the top layer to using a 1x2 with a stud in the middle for the middle layer. Maybe that makes it a little bit more obvious, like the design things you'd have to kind of figure out when building something like this. So those are really the main things that kind of make this thing come together. It's pretty structurally sound, which I was happy about. It's very heavy. It's also quite big. I feel like kind of looking at it in the grand scheme of things, especially with this giant building right here, it's kind of dwarfed. It kind of dwarfs this turret, which is not the worst thing in the world. Like the turret, this is actually a pretty good size for it, I think, especially if you consider like reference material. Like the scaling, I think looks great. But this thing in itself is pretty freaking huge. Like you can see there's the Porg there, and it's taller than the Porg. The Porg's not a small build. And if you consider like a minifig next to it, for example, this is a big boy. This is a big boy. So I think that really just puts into perspective how large this building is, considering like you have the minifig, and then you have this giant turret, right? And then you have this even more giant building in the middle. So this MOC is just going to be massive. It's ridiculous. And then the last thing to talk about on the turret are these front sections. This was actually quite difficult to figure out because if you look at the design of it, there's basically like the cannons have this like kind of assembly right behind it, and it's replicated 3 times. So that made things simple in that I really only had to build one thing 3 times as opposed to having to, you know, figure out many different like designs for the front of this thing. But getting them all to actually kind of fit and I don't know, just like line up correctly was kind of difficult, specifically because one of the things I noticed is that these actually are parallel with each other and parallel with the bottom one. So I wanted to make sure that they lined up reasonably well. You can see it's not perfect. I'm going to have to, basically when I actually add the cannons to it, I want to need like some support to go deep into the turret to make sure it doesn't kind of flip out like this because they are angled like that. But I actually really love the way it came out. I think it looks pretty accurate too. Like if you look at the actual photos of this thing, like it looks pretty dang good. And I also really just appreciate like all these details in here, like the slopes that kind of come out. I don't know, it makes the turbo laser, I feel, look a lot more detailed, especially with a lot of the shadows in there. I don't know, for me, that's just very appealing to the eye. But really, that's all I got for you guys this week. That is the turbo laser. I guess we can finish with one far away shot of what the MOC's looking like so far. And it's looking good, guys. We're making some pretty good progress. So let's go ahead and go to the end of the video. And that's going to finish up the update for this week, guys. Let me know what you think about it in the comment section below. One, I'm happy I was able to return to doing a time-lapse here. I know it's been a while since I've done one of those in an update on this channel. And then, of course, I think the turret is looking outstanding. I just love it. This week, I'm going to place the orders for the cannons. Hopefully, they'll come in before this upcoming update. More realistically, they probably won't. So I'm probably actually just going to shift focus to working on the rock work. Rock work needs to be done. That is basically the last major thing I have to do for this front part of the MOC, I guess outside of building the second turret. But I'm liking the way this MOC is progressing so far. It is so nice to look at. It's so expansive. It's huge. And the turret definitely adds a lot to it. And I think having the cannons is going to add even more to it. So you guys can expect that probably in the update after next, before this upcoming week. I'm probably just going to work on rock work because it needs to be done. I'm kind of done putting it off. I'm just going to go ahead and see how much rock work I can get done. Then I think that'll really go a long way in making this look like a more completed MOC, so you won't see the giant windows on either side of the big building, but instead some snow mountains. But really, that's all I got for you guys this week. If you like what I do, go ahead, support the video by hitting the like button, support the channel by smashing that subscribe button, and I'll be back again very soon.